June 1st, 1943. Over the Allied command centers in England, planners faced a seemingly impossible challenge. How could the P-51 Mustang, a sleek and nimble fighter, reach deep into German airspace to escort bombers and still make it home safely? Every mile over the enemy's territory was fraught with danger: anti-aircraft guns, Luftwaffe interceptors, and unpredictable weather. Pilots had no room for error. Survival depended not only on skill, but on ingenuity. The problem was clear: the P-51's fuel capacity limited its range. Without modification, it could not reach Berlin and return. Commanders debated options: heavier planes, additional fuel, or new tactics, but all seemed inadequate. Every solution had drawbacks. Added weight reduced maneuverability, increased risk of engine failure, or exposed pilots to enemy fire for longer periods. The clock was ticking, and the bombing campaign depended on long-range fighter escort to protect Allied bombers from catastrophic losses. Amidst the tension, one engineer in a small workshop on the outskirts of London began experimenting with an idea so audacious it seemed almost impossible. He proposed a lightweight, disposable fuel tank made of simple materials that could be attached to the Mustang, extend its range, and then safely jettisoned once empty. The concept was met with skepticism. Could something so fragile survive the rigors of high-speed combat? Would it explode under fire or tear off in turbulence? Flight logs, letters, and diaries from pilots of the time reveal their apprehension. Captain James "Jimmy" Edwards, one of the first to fly a Mustang with the new auxiliary tank, wrote, "We were told this little tank would carry us farther than ever before. I looked at it, a thin, almost paper-like container clinging beneath my plane, and thought, this is either genius or disaster." The stakes could not have been higher. Success meant escorting bombers safely into the heart of Germany, reducing losses, and tipping the balance in the air war. Failure meant losing planes, pilots, and precious confidence in the Allies' technological edge. This was a battle of innovation as much as a battle of skill, a contest in which engineering brilliance could alter the course of history. As the first Mustangs lined up on the runway, engines roaring, pilots steeling themselves for a flight that would take them deep into enemy territory, the world held its breath. The paper fuel tank was about to be tested in the most unforgiving laboratory imaginable: the skies over Nazi Germany. Behind the scenes, in a small engineering workshop tucked away from the chaos of wartime London, a team of brilliant minds faced one of the most urgent challenges of the air war. They needed a solution that could extend the P-51 Mustang's range, without adding excessive weight, compromising speed, or risking structural failure. The idea seemed almost ludicrous: a lightweight, disposable fuel tank made from simple materials, clinging beneath a plane hurtling through the skies at hundreds of miles per hour. The chief engineer, Robert Andrews, sketched designs late into the night, his hands smudged with graphite and oil. "It must be light, it must hold fuel, and it must be safe to jettison," he muttered. Colleagues watched skeptically, shaking their heads at the seemingly fragile concept. Some argued the tanks would rupture under air pressure or explode if hit by enemy fire. Others doubted pilots would trust them. Prototypes were crafted from thin metal and reinforced paper-like composites, designed to withstand aerodynamic stress, yet be light enough not to slow the Mustang. Engineers ran tests in wind tunnels and simulated conditions, measuring drag, stress points, and fuel capacity. Every experiment revealed new challenges: seams that leaked, mounts that rattled, tanks that distorted under high speeds. Despite repeated setbacks, the team pressed on. Flight engineers collaborated with pilots to understand maneuvering forces, while metallurgists tested new alloys to reinforce the tanks. Each failure brought new insights, each adjustment a step closer to a functional solution. It was innovation born of necessity, a marriage of theory and daring practicality. Captain James Edwards, one of the pilots briefed on the tanks, recalled later, "We were told to trust these tanks, but looking at them, thin, almost paper-like. I didn't know whether to laugh or pray. Still, we had no choice. Our mission depended on it. The tension was palpable. Success could redefine the air war over Europe, allowing Mustangs to escort bombers deep into German territory. Failure could mean losing planes, men, and confidence in Allied ingenuity. Every calculation, every prototype, every late-night adjustment mattered. In the shadows of the workshop, under dim lights, and the hum of machinery, the fate of the skies over Berlin was being decided, not with bullets or bombs, but with ingenuity, patience, and relentless innovation. After weeks of sketches, calculations, and experiments, the first functional prototypes of the paper fuel tanks were finally ready. Light, thin, yet surprisingly resilient, they seemed almost too fragile to survive the rigors of combat. Engineers and pilots alike held their breath, knowing that the slightest miscalculation could turn this bold experiment into disaster. The tanks were attached to test Mustangs on a quiet airfield in England. Engines roared to life, propellers spinning at dizzying speeds as pilots prepared for the first trial flight. Observers from the engineering team lined the runway, watching anxiously. Every seam, every mount, every connection had been double-checked, but the unpredictability of high-speed flight could not be fully simulated in workshops or wind tunnels. Private logs and letters from ground crews capture the tension. We watched the planes taxi down the runway, tanks hanging beneath like delicate appendages. Any failure now could mean tragedy, but if it worked, it could change the war. The Mustangs lifted off, slicing through the morning mist. At first, the tanks wobbled, flexing under the aerodynamic forces, but then settled into a smooth rhythm, supplying fuel steadily to the aircraft's engine. Engineers exchanged cautious glances. It was working. The paper tanks were holding, performing exactly as intended. Subsequent test flights pushed the limits. Extended ranges, evasive maneuvers, and simulated combat conditions. The tanks survived each trial, proving that ingenuity, careful calculation, and daring design could overcome the limitations of conventional engineering. Every successful flight brought relief, admiration, and renewed hope. Captain James Edwards, the first operational pilot, later wrote, "When I saw the tank perform flawlessly, I felt a surge of confidence. We could finally reach Berlin without the constant fear of running out of fuel. It was a small device, yes, but it carried the weight of an entire mission, and perhaps the outcome of the air war itself." With the prototypes proven, plans were drawn for operational deployment. The stage was set for the Mustangs to embark on their first long-range missions, escorted by these lightweight, disposable tanks. What seemed like a fragile, almost impossible innovation had become a game-changer, a testament to human ingenuity under pressure, and a beacon of hope for Allied pilots poised to enter the heart of enemy territory. September 12, 1943. Dawn broke over the English Channel as the first Mustangs, fitted with the new paper fuel tanks, prepared for a historic mission. Pilots climbed into their cockpits with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Every plane carried not just fuel, but the hopes of the Allied bombing campaign, and the fate of pilots who would rely on these fragile devices over hundreds of miles of hostile territory. Captain James Edwards, gripping the controls, glanced at the tank beneath his aircraft. Its thin, almost paper-like structure seemed impossibly fragile. Yet it represented innovation, courage, and the collective ingenuity of engineers who had refused to accept defeat. As the Mustangs roared down the runway and lifted into the sky, every second of the flight was a test of nerves as much as technology. Crossing the channel, pilots focused on navigation, aware that over enemy territory, every mistake could be fatal. Anti-aircraft guns awaited below. Luftwaffe fighters prowled the skies, and the distant targets loomed large. Yet the paper fuel tanks performed perfectly, steadily feeding the engines and allowing the Mustangs to maintain range and speed. The pilots began to realize that this simple innovation had expanded their reach, transforming what had been a near-impossible mission into a viable operation. Flight logs and pilot letters reveal the mix of awe and relief. We pushed the planes to their limits, climbed high, and executed maneuvers that once would have exhausted our fuel. But the tanks held. They held, and we could see Berlin, targets within reach, and the thought that we could return safely filled us with confidence unlike anything before. The success of this first operational mission sent ripples through Allied command. Bombers, previously vulnerable to long-range attacks, could now be escorted deep into enemy territory. The Mustang pilots' courage, combined with the ingenuity of engineers and the reliability of the paper tanks, had created a force multiplier that changed the air war. On the ground, engineers watched anxiously as radio updates confirmed each plane's progress. When the first Mustangs returned safely, with tanks jettisoned intact, cheers erupted in workshops across England. A seemingly fragile invention had become a decisive factor in the skies over Europe, allowing Allied pilots to strike deeper, harder, and more safely than ever before. In the words of Captain Edwards, "It wasn't just a tank. It was a lifeline. It carried us farther than we thought possible, and in doing so, it carried the war a step closer to victory." As the weeks progressed, the Mustangs equipped with paper fuel tanks became a familiar sight in the skies over Europe. But for the pilots, each mission was a test of nerve, skill, and trust in technology. Flying hundreds of miles over enemy territory, every minute carried the weight of life and death, and every maneuver could determine whether they returned home. Captain James Edwards recalled one mission over central Germany. The tanks beneath our wings were thin, almost fragile. Every time I dove or banked sharply, I glanced at them. I thought, one mistake, one enemy tracer, and it's all over. Yet they held, steady, feeding fuel just as promised. It was incredible. This little piece of engineering was keeping us alive. Pilots encountered enemy fighters, anti-aircraft fire, and the unpredictable challenges of weather at high altitude. The paper tanks, designed to be both lightweight and resilient, performed flawlessly under conditions no workshop could fully replicate. Maneuvers that would have drained traditional fuel reserves now became possible, giving pilots the confidence to protect bombers deep within German airspace. Lieutenant Karl Brenner, flying his first escort mission to Berlin, wrote in his diary, "We soared over cities we had only seen in maps. The tanks never faltered. It felt like flying with wings made by men who thought ahead, planning for every possibility." I realized then that victory was not just about shooting down enemies. It was about innovation, precision, and trust. Each return flight reinforced the extraordinary impact of the invention. Pilots began to trust the paper tanks as much as their own skills. Letters home captured a mixture of relief and awe. We reached our targets, escorted the bombers safely, and returned with fuel to spare. I still cannot believe how such a fragile device carried us so far, yet it did. Engineers have changed the air war in ways we are only beginning to understand. Through these missions, the pilot's perspective shifted. The paper fuel tanks were no longer just equipment. They were a lifeline, a silent partner in every mission. And as word of successful missions spread, both pilots and commanders began to see the transformative power of small innovations in modern warfare. How a single idea, executed flawlessly, could alter the course of the skies over Europe. By late 1943, the first operational missions using the paper fuel tanks had yielded extraordinary results. Mustangs now reached Berlin and beyond, escorting bombers safely to their targets and returning with fuel to spare. For the pilots, engineers, and commanders, the success was both thrilling and unprecedented. Captain James Edwards reflected, "I had flown hundreds of missions before, but this was different. We were now capable of going deeper, staying longer, and protecting bombers in ways we had only dreamed of. The little tanks beneath our wings made the impossible routine. Allied command quickly recognized the tactical advantage. Bombing raids suffered fewer losses, German defenses were stretched thin, and morale among bomber crews soared. Every mission completed with the support of the paper tanks reinforced the Allies' strategic air superiority. Meanwhile, German pilots and command were taken aback. Luftwaffe reports detailed the extended range of American fighters, the seemingly effortless escort over enemy territory, and the new ability to strike deep with reduced vulnerability. Letters from German airmen expressed disbelief. The Americans have found a way to fly further than we imagined. Their fighters reach our heartland and return unscathed. It is as if they have wings made of steel and ingenuity. The engineering innovation that began in a small London workshop had transformed the air war. It allowed Allied forces to maintain constant pressure on German cities, protect bomber formations, and alter the strategic calculations of the Luftwaffe. What had seemed like a fragile, almost improbable invention had become a decisive weapon. Pilots' letters and diaries echoed the sentiment. The tanks work flawlessly. They give us reach, confidence, and an edge we could never have had. We are no longer limited by fuel, only by our courage and skill. I cannot overstate how much this small device has changed our missions. In the skies over Europe, the paper fuel tanks prove that even the simplest innovation, when executed with precision and trust, could change the tide of war. Allied pilots had gained the freedom to fly further, fight smarter, and protect their comrades. And the enemy, once confident in their defensive reach, now faced a new, unexpected threat: ingenuity and relentless determination. As news of the Mustang's extended reach spread through the Luftwaffe, shock and disbelief rippled across German command. Reports from reconnaissance and pilots highlighted a troubling reality. American fighters were reaching cities previously considered safe from attack, escorting bombers deep into German territory, and returning without loss. The little paper tanks, unassuming yet revolutionary, had fundamentally changed the air war. Oberleutnant Franz Weber, a Luftwaffe pilot stationed near Berlin, wrote in his journal, "We watched the Mustangs arrive, seemingly from nowhere. They accompanied the bombers far beyond our expected range, and then simply returned. It is as if they have discovered a secret we cannot comprehend." German commanders convened emergency meetings to assess the threat. Fuel calculations, flight ranges, and intercept strategies were scrutinized, but the more they analyzed, the clearer it became. American ingenuity had outpaced their expectations. The seemingly fragile auxiliary tanks were allowing an operational reach that German forces had never anticipated, rendering traditional defense plans inadequate. Reports to Berlin described the frustration. "Our fighters are engaged too late. The bombers are already escorted. We cannot intercept in time. How are they doing this?" Even experienced commanders were forced to acknowledge that the Allies had found a clever solution, one that required minimal resources, yet had maximal impact. Letters from German airmen reflected a mix of admiration and despair. "The Americans fly further, faster, and with protection we cannot match. It is maddening, yet we cannot deny their skill and ingenuity. This is not just technology. This is strategy in motion, and we are behind." The psychological effect on German pilots was profound. They had once seen the P-51 as just another fighter, but now it represented a combination of engineering brilliance and tactical advantage that left them constantly on edge. Every incoming Mustang was no longer just an enemy plane. It was proof of Allied innovation, planning, and relentless problem-solving. In this way, a simple piece of engineering, a paper fuel tank, had far-reaching consequences beyond mechanics. It reshaped strategies, disrupted enemy confidence, and demonstrated the immense value of creativity under pressure. For the POWs, pilots and engineers alike, this lesson was clear. In modern warfare, Ingenuity can be as lethal as any weapon, and victory often favors those who think beyond conventional boundaries. The success of the paper fuel tank was more than just luck. It was a triumph of engineering ingenuity, careful calculation, and creative problem-solving. The tank's design was deceptively simple: lightweight, disposable, and efficient. It allowed the Mustang to carry enough fuel for unprecedented long-range missions. Yet behind this simplicity lay a complex understanding of aerodynamics, materials science, and operational strategy. Engineers like Robert Andrews knew that the tank had to withstand high-speed flight, turbulence, and enemy fire while remaining light enough not to compromise the Mustang's maneuverability. Every seam, every material choice, every attachment mechanism was tested, refined, and perfected. The result was a marvel of wartime innovation, a solution that worked flawlessly in combat without adding complexity for pilots already facing mortal danger. Flight engineers and metallurgists collaborated, experimenting with paper-like composites reinforced with thin metal layers, ensuring both flexibility and durability. Simulations, wind tunnel tests, and trial flights revealed potential failures, each of which was corrected with ingenuity. The final product was lightweight enough to be discarded safely, once empty, yet reliable enough to be trusted for hundreds of miles over enemy territory. Pilots quickly learned to respect the innovation. Lieutenant Carl Brenner wrote, "I was skeptical at first. It looked fragile, almost laughable. But after the first mission, I realized that every calculation, every test, every sleepless night in the workshop mattered. It carried us farther than any of us thought possible, and saved lives in the process." Beyond technical success, the paper fuel tank taught a vital lesson about innovation in warfare. Sometimes, the simplest ideas, executed with precision, can have the largest impact. It reminded commanders and engineers alike that creativity, collaboration, and bold thinking can solve problems that appear insurmountable. In the skies over Europe, a small disposable tank had become a force multiplier, enabling strategies that reshaped the air war. The paper fuel tank exemplified a broader principle. In modern warfare, ingenuity often outweighs brute force. A small, well-designed innovation can change tactics, save lives, and tilt the balance of power. And, for the engineers, pilots, and planners involved, it was a testament to human problem-solving under pressure, proof that even in the darkest times, creativity and intelligence can change the course of history. By 1944, the success of the paper fuel tank had become more than a tactical advantage. It had reshaped the very strategy of long-range air operations. Mustangs could escort bombers to targets deep within Germany, drastically reducing Allied losses and increasing the effectiveness of strategic bombing campaigns. A small, unassuming invention had transformed the operational landscape. Pilots' letters and diaries reflect the impact. "We flew farther than ever, escorted bombers through skies we thought unreachable, and returned safely. This little tank changed everything," wrote Lieutenant Carl Brenner. What seemed like a simple solution had turned into a game-changer, proving that innovation could outmatch raw numbers and firepower. Beyond immediate operations, the tank's design inspired engineers to think creatively under pressure. Aircraft modification units adopted similar lightweight solutions for extended missions, and military planners began to recognize the importance of adaptable, rapid innovations in the field. The paper fuel tank became a symbol of how ingenuity could compensate for limitations and amplify effectiveness across an entire air campaign. German pilots and commanders, still reeling from the extended reach of the Mustangs, acknowledged the tactical surprise and advantage it provided. Reports emphasize that no conventional countermeasure could fully negate the effect of these lightweight tanks, giving the Allies a sustained strategic edge. The innovation had changed the psychology of air combat. German forces now faced an enemy capable of striking farther and faster than anticipated. Historians today reflect on the paper fuel tank as a case study in wartime problem solving. It illustrates how engineers and military planners, when thinking outside conventional constraints, can produce solutions that save lives, alter strategies, and influence the outcome of entire campaigns. A simple, disposable tank carried more than fuel. It carried the hopes of pilots, the effectiveness of missions, and ultimately, a lesson for generations. Ingenuity is as critical as courage in war. The story of the paper fuel tank reminds us that innovation is not always loud or explosive. Sometimes it is a small, calculated, brilliant idea that changes everything. And for the pilots who flew with it, the engineers who designed it, and the strategists who deployed it, its legacy endured long after the engines fell silent and the skies of Europe grew quiet. As the war pressed on, and the Mustangs continued to escort bombers deeper into enemy territory, one truth became clear. The outcome of the air war was shaped not only by pilots' bravery, but by ingenuity, innovation, and the clever application of engineering principles. A simple, lightweight, disposable fuel tank, thin enough to seem fragile, had extended the reach of Allied fighters and altered the balance of the skies. For pilots like Captain James Edwards and Lieutenant Carl Brenner, the tanks were more than equipment. They were lifelines. Every mission flown with them was a test of skill, trust, and courage. Every successful return was a testament to the engineers who had worked tirelessly behind the scenes, often away from the front lines, shaping the course of history with calculations, sketches, and relentless experimentation. Historians today note that innovations like the paper fuel tank exemplify the extraordinary impact of human creativity in wartime. It was not the largest weapon, nor the most destructive, but it changed strategy, saved countless lives, and proved that intelligence and foresight can be as powerful as bombs or bullets. Letters from pilots capture the awe and gratitude. We flew further than we imagined possible. We returned safely. It was a small device, but it carried hope, skill, and the ingenuity of men determined to win. The German forces, observing these extended missions, realized too late the scope of American innovation, an invisible edge that could not be countered through conventional tactics. The legacy of the paper fuel tank endures as a story of problem-solving under pressure, collaboration between engineers and pilots, and the transformative power of even small innovations. It reminds us that wars are not only won with courage in combat, but with the application of intellect, imagination, and the ability to see solutions where others see obstacles. In the end, the paper fuel tank did more than extend the range of the Mustang. It extended the possibilities of human achievement in times of crisis. It allowed pilots to strike with confidence, protected thousands of lives, and contributed to the Allied victory in Europe. And its story continues to inspire. In the most desperate moments, innovation can turn the tide. Courage and ingenuity can soar higher than any plane, and even the smallest idea can make history.